Decide to be the light in the room instead of the darkness, right? Be on a mission to encourage other people and to maybe even cause a shift in their neural networks by your attitude and your actions. Decide not to live in fear, but rather look for hope in everything. Are my thoughts helping me or hurting me? Am I overthinking or overinflating things? Beginning to analyze what you're thinking about is going to bring the greatest amount of change in neuroplasticity in your life, but it's also going to help you be a teacher to others and help them to be more neuroplastic.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of This Day and Age, and I'm your host, Phil Tower. I am so glad you've joined us, and I have a question for you. Are you a resilient person? Stop and think about that. I want you to unpack that because we're talking about resilience, and specifically, I'd like to ask you if you know what that really means. If we look at the word resilience, the Oxford Dictionary describes it as having the capacity to withstand or recover quickly from difficulties. It's also defined as toughness. So in this episode of This Day and Age, we're going to unpack the secrets of successfully embracing change and becoming a more resilient person as we age. We know life can be tough. It can throw a lot of curveballs at you, and that's why this resilience thing is so important. And stick around at the end of this episode. We'll have 3 key takeaways about just how you can become a more resilient person as you age. I'm very pleased to welcome our guest in this episode, Michelle Steffes. She is founder and CEO of IPV Consulting. They are online at ipvconsulting.com. Michelle has over 25 years of leadership experience in this area. She's a thought leader and influential speaker on self-empowerment and cognitive transformation. You really can change your brain to be a more effective, more resilient person. That's what we're going to focus on. Michelle's been featured in national media. She's also the author of 2 excellent books on this topic, Reframe and Rewire, Greatness Through Daily Routine, and also a children's book. I love the title of this book, The Machine Inside Me, How to Change Your Brain and Discover the Power Within You. Both written from over 10,000 hours of study and research in the science of habits and human achievement. Michelle Steffes, welcome to this episode of This Day and Age. I'm so glad you're with us.
Thanks so much, Phil. It's a joy to be with you today, especially on this topic, one of my favorites.
Yeah, it is a fascinating topic, and it's so fascinating when you talk about the idea of actually changing your brain, rewiring your brain, if you will. You know, people say you are who you are, especially at 25 or 45 years of age, but you say, no, that's not true. I can actually teach you using your brain to rewire your way of thinking, to become a more resilient person, and to change a lot of the way you behave in a really interesting way. And as you said, a lot of research goes into this. When did you know you first wanted to study about the brain and the power to change using your brain?
Well, that's a great question, and I love the lead-in on that because it is so true. We can change. But I've always had an interest in seeing people win. As far back as I can remember, it's just been my motto that it's all about the people. So whether we're talking about leadership or people in the winter of life, I really believe anyone can win, and as once they understand how the brain works. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about the science of that, and that's really when I started to see the biggest breakthroughs with my clients as well as myself as a little over a decade ago when I started the studies on how to rewire the brain, understanding physiology, understanding neurochemistry, neuroplasticity. And I know those are all big words. We're going to get into that a little bit more and help you understand it. But it really did impact my life as well as everyone that I've had the privilege to talk to about it.
Is there an optimal age, Michelle, for rewiring your brain, for retraining your thinking and becoming more resilient, becoming a person who is more tough in situations that you previously maybe you would have cowered from? Do we have a connection between chronological age and the ability to rewire your thinking?
Well, that's a really great question and one I get asked often. First, before I answer on ages, because I've got all of those for you in a list, I just want to say that we're neuroplastic our entire lives, meaning we can rewire our brains at any point in life. Even if you're 95, you still can do it. And I hope show the audience today how that can be done. But 0 through 7, you are the most neuroplastic, meaning you can wire much, much faster. Kids are in what is called theta brainwave state. It's a programming state similar to hypnotism. So they just absorb and transfer that into wiring immediately without even questioning. That's why you can tell them there's a Santa Claus or tooth fairy and they'll believe it. But you then continue to wire in the majority of your neural networks by the age of 35. Then after that, you have to continue to prune off what you're not using and wire in new thinking. And so you stay neuroplastic your entire life, but you are most neuroplastic 0 through 7.
And what's fascinating is you said even at 95, you've got some of that neuroplasticity. And I want to talk about that. That neuroplasticity essentially means you can import or take new information into your brain and actually learn it, even at someone who's in your mid-90s. Fair enough to say?
Definitely, yes. If someone is willing to not only understand it, which we hope to do today, but really begin to apply it. I'm going to give you some practical principles on how you can do that today. It is definitely doable.
So self-empowerment and changing your way of thinking, becoming more resilient. There are a lot of people who think, well, I'm kind of set in my ways. I'm not good at relearning things or changing my way of thinking. That mindset itself, I'm really curious, can that be a detriment to you trying to change somebody in terms of their cognitive processing and rewiring their brain?
No question about that. The mindset itself can stop you from bringing about the change that you need. And in a little bit, I hope to give you an example of a specific research that was done by a professor from Harvard where she worked with 70 to 80-year-olds and saw change within a week. So I think that'll be an interesting place that we can review a little bit later on. But yes, your mindset is huge. And I definitely want to enforce the fact that we've got to have the right mindset to do this.
All right, let's zoom in on resilience and how you talk about it in your training in terms of resilience and changing your brain. What does it mean to you?
Well, resilience is really a bunch of thoughts and reactions that come out of patterns and mindsets that have been developed over a lifetime. So we go back to the question you just asked me on mindsets and kind of piggybacking from that. It's really about, thinking about what you're thinking about and then starting to realize where is that stemming from? Where is that coming from? What's the root of that? And then deciding to change or shift some of even the smallest little habits that you do every day or behaviors or things you listen to or people that surround you. Just beginning to shift things, even a small amount at a time, can begin to rewire the brain and alter those thoughts and reactions, making you more resilient. So it's really about a change of perception and then a lifestyle change. And I don't want to scare anybody when I say lifestyle, but because it can be just the tiniest of little things that you can do that can bring about that change, but that will rewire your brain and alter your state.
And a lot of people hear this and they go, well, I've been, Michelle, to be honest, kind of person who's resistant to change. I get nervous. I get anxious when I think about change, especially change in my work routine, my home routine. How do you respond to that person who says, "Oh, Michelle, don't come at me with this change thing"?
Yes, and the fact is that, some personalities are more bent towards a fear of change than others. Some of them are more risk takers, so I do understand that. And if you fall into that category, fear not, because the changes that we're talking about are just very simple to apply. In fact, we've been talking about the book Reframe and Rewire, and there's a workbook to actually walk you through that. But just to give you a couple of examples on what we're talking about, just the tiniest thing like maybe getting up and deciding to have a gratitude list in the morning instead of going through your list of everything that's wrong. Whether you write it on your mirror or you create a little index card that's taped to your cupboard. And we can get into more of that. But even the smallest things like that can begin to create the shift in your mind that causes the difference.
It is important to embrace this idea of change, especially as you age, because change is going to happen. It's not something you can put in a closet and say, I'm just not going to deal with change. I'm going to be the same person at 40 as I was at 22, and I'm going to be the same person at 60 as I was at 40. You really cannot do that, Michelle Steffes, can you?
No, you can't do that. However, I'm glad that you brought about the topic of change, because when it comes to people who are aging, that is one of the biggest times in life when change is inevitable. So in other words, you may have to quit driving. You may have to change your protocol, your health program. You may have to change where you live. You may have to give up some things that you enjoyed previously. And so with your permission, I'd like to kind of carry them through the cycle of change to help them to kind of see that they're normal and that there's a way through it.
Let's do that. Let's walk through that, if you will.
Awesome. So whenever we have the first change, and, everybody can relate back to when COVID happened and we all had our lives, everybody's in the world was changed. But you can compare that to, say, a death in the family, or like not being able to drive or having to move into an assisted living program. You're going to have this sense of loss right at the very front. That's stage one. And that's going to cause you to feel a lot of fear, a lot of caution, maybe even some kind of paralyzation of the mind. And then if you can get through that phase, then you get into stage two, which is usually the natural flow, and you start to feel some anger, some resentment, maybe uncertainty, and even denial that it's happening. And then stage three happens shortly after that, and that's the distressed stage. So now you feel anxious, confused, you don't know how to move forward, and you become very unproductive. And that's when a lot of times people start to lose their sense of purpose and value. And that's a dangerous place to be, because what's going to happen next is put you right in the danger zone, or what I call the fallout zone. And in fallout, that's where you can begin to lose your mental health, lose your resiliency, or your ability. Even if you've been maybe resilient your whole life, now suddenly you don't feel resilient. You don't even know how to get back on your feet again. You feel very lost and confused. You can lose things like income, family relationships. A number of different things can happen. If you're still employed, you could lose your job, because that danger zone, that fallout, is a very paralyzing place to be that can cause a lot of issues that you didn't really want to see happen. But as it transitions through the change, it's a place of making decisions. Okay, so my point is, at this point, you've got to make some decisions about where you want to go next. If you're willing to decide that you're going to look at this from a different perception, and we're going to provide you with those perception looks today, then you can get into stage four, which is discovery. Now, maybe everything is still chaos around you, but now you decide you're going to move forward, and you begin to get a little hope back, some more discernment, and some of your energy starts to restore. Then you get into stage five. You begin to get some confidence back. You start to feel more secured, productive. It doesn't mean that your surroundings have changed, but because you've decided to move forward, you're literally rewiring your brain to see life through different eyes. And then finally, stage six, you feel excited, focused, and engaged in life again. It's just from a different platform.
So when you are on the precipice, Michelle Steffes, of that fallout stage, it is really critical to then use your cognitive ability to talk yourself out of falling over the edge. And I'm being very basic in explaining this, using very rudimentary words, but I guess what I'm trying to understand is, I think you're saying that's where that positive mindset, if you will, and retraining yourself, saying, I can do this, I can get through that, positive self-talk. I've got to think that's an important part of this, of getting to stage six, where you've got that positive, more confident outlook on life.
Definitely. And it starts with acceptance, because we've got to ask ourselves the question, is this something that we really can change? Because sometimes we can't. I mean, if we can't drive anymore, then we can't drive anymore. If we can't live on our own anymore because it's too dangerous, then we need to start having some acceptance. And that's when we can begin to get the help we need. Much like, I guess you could compare it to, say, an alcoholic. Until they decide to admit that they have alcoholism, you cannot help them. So when it comes to big changes in life, we have to make the right decisions. And if we don't, then we get to stay in those stages 1 through 3, feeling distressed and confused and full of denial and just an immense amount of anguish, which then just sends us in this downward spiral.
Michelle Steffes is with us on This Day and Age, a true thought leader and speaker on self-empowerment and cognitive transformation. She's written a really terrific book on this subject, Reframe and Rewire Greatness Through Daily Routine, as we're talking about having a resilience mindset as you age and getting through these areas of change in your life, which are inevitable. I want to talk with you, Michelle, about the process of learning from individuals that you've worked with, individuals you've coached who have faced significant changes in their later years. I know our listeners would love to hear about them, as I would. Talk about some of the people you've met and how you've helped them change.
Well, certainly. I'm going to share first a story of a gal that she was 65 when I started working with her. And she had 30 years track record of being stuck in that phase 1 through 3 that we just mentioned, the stages. And she wasn't sleeping at night. She had a number of health issues, which, mind you, when you are under a lot of stress, you're releasing a ton of cortisol, adrenaline, norepinephrine, and a lot of the neurochemicals that can cause all of those issues that I mentioned in stages 1 through 3. Any case, after working with her for just 5 weeks, she came to me one morning and she said, "Michelle, you're not going to believe this, but I woke up and saw daylight today." And I said, "Well, why is that a big deal?" And we just laughed together. And she said, "Well, you don't understand." She says, "I have never, ever in my life slept through the night. And because of the changes I've made internally, I am now sleeping through the night. I have a sense of peace that I don't even remember the last time I had." And what we're talking about, Phil, is not only changes in our mind, but those changes that we decide to make in our perceptions can literally remove a lot of the physical symptoms, such as joint aches, loss of memory, which is a shrinking of the hippocampus. That's the memory center of the brain. Mm-hmm. It can also cause a lot of psychological issues and physiological issues that lead to a number of symptoms that we're battling. And we accuse old age of it, but 85% of doctor visits are stress-related.
I was just going to say, you truly can worry yourself to a point of physical sickness.
Absolutely. Oh, yes. And it happens all the time. And many people don't realize that that's the crux of the issue that they have. I'm not saying all symptoms are related that way, but many, I would say the majority of them are stress-related to some degree. And I'd like to talk about Dr. Ellen Langer on that note. Okay. She's not a personal client, but she's a professor of psychology from Harvard. And this is a really interesting study, especially for your audience today. But she converted a monastery in New Hampshire to match the 1959 era. Now, she did this in 79, and she converted it so that all the interior modifications she made matched 1959 era. So everything from the curtains and, decor, the kitchen, even the appliances, the furniture. And she had a radio that was only programmed to play radio stations from that era, and a TV that was only programmed to play TV shows from that era. She even had magazines and books from that era. And what she told these 70 to 80-year-old participants, and there were many that were involved, I believe it was around 8 men that were involved. They were in their 70s or 80s, and they were told for 1 week to act like they were 20 years younger. So that meant everything from carrying their own luggage up, even if they had a walker, to making their own food, to, talking about and reminiscing as if they were 20 years younger. So talking about their job at that time, everything had to be in that mindset or that mind space. Even the caregivers were told to comply with that. In 1 week, they came back, and they had tested these participants before they started their week and after, and they noticed significant changes in their flexibility, their hearing, even their vision, memory, and cognition. Some of them had stopped using their walkers, and a few of them, when the doctor pulled in, Dr. Ellen Langer pulled in, were actually in the front yard tossing a ball together, football. So you talk about mindset and shift in perception. Our brains are much more powerful than we give it credit for.
That's really fascinating. And all by just changing the environment that these 8 men lived in. I've got to ask Michelle about this whole power of having a journey of resilience and actually transforming people. What's fascinating is you just told the story of this 65-year-old woman you worked with to help her overcome her issues in her mind, not sleeping for over 30 years, being stuck in those first 3 stages, if you will. But coming out on the other side of that had to be really powerful and transformative. Can you talk about that for our listeners in terms of maybe they're having a hard time seeing, yeah, I can get from this point of being stuck and having the same life, the same struggles every day, to a true area of growth and celebrating where I've come in just a relatively short period of time?
Absolutely. Well, some of the things that we worked on, and I'm going to kind of rewind to the beginning of this program today, is a simple change in habits. So instead of her getting up and thinking about her woes and everything that was wrong, she chose to make a gratitude list. She chose to start journaling. She chose to start reframing, which is cognitive restructuring. We mentioned that earlier on, where you take an incident, an issue, or maybe some tragedy that's happened, and you literally, through 4 steps, rewire your thoughts about that to find a solution at the other end, rather than just roll in the mud over and over, rehearsing it, which we didn't really talk about neuroplasticity that much. But please understand that when I work with somebody like her, what I've got to teach her is that she is wiring in everything that she's thinking about, acting, doing, all of her habits of every day. And if she's got a lot of negative neural networks that she's wired in over a lifetime, and you have 100 billion neurons and 1,000 trillion synaptic connections in a lifetime, okay? And if you have all that to rewire, then you've got a lot of work to do in terms of the little things that you decide to do each day. And what she experienced on the other end of that was that she had literally stopped feeding those networks that were negative and replaced them with the things like gratitude, journaling, reframing different scenarios in her life to see a better side of it, spending more time reading and listening instead of to the news, reading and listening books that inspire her, programs that motivate, encourage her, or even educate her. And because she did that for a total of 5 weeks, she was able to see a significant difference on the other end, not only because she cut off the energy supply to the old neural networks that were just repeating themselves, the voices in your head that are ugly, right? To beginning to hear new voices because she's rewiring and the old networks are falling off and the new networks are coming in on that neuron. So that's a lot of science in a short amount of time. If there's something that didn't make sense to you, let's go back over it.
I love that. And let's kind of talk about some practical techniques for our listeners of this day and age, especially, I think one of them was pretty obvious and powerful is that gratitude list, that daily gratitude journal. What are some other techniques for becoming a more resilient person and literally changing your mind and your cognitive process and kind of rewiring your brain?
Well, great question. And I'd mentioned news and media. I think there is a big problem with that, especially in today's world, and there's nothing wrong with allocating, a half hour or an hour a day with the news, but pay attention as to how it's affecting you and how much you're actually absorbing, because that news is becoming part of you. It is becoming cemented into your neural networks. And decide you're going to exchange that out for something more productive, whether it's going for a walk with your pet or with maybe your kids or your grandkids or your neighbor or your friend, or whether it's just replacing it with something that's more nourishing to your soul. Maybe it's some music. Maybe it's, spending time, like I said, reading a book or something of that nature. Pay attention to what kind of entertainment you're involved in and how much. How much is too much? Begin to really think about what you're thinking about and how all of these exterior sources that are feeding into you every day are affecting you. Are they making you feel better or are they making you feel worse? Where's your focus? Pay attention to what you're focusing on. Do you need to shift that focus? Do you need something to preoccupy yourself, a new hobby? And what kind of influences? Are you caught up in a group of people that always talk about their illness and doom and gloom in the day, in our world, and everything that's wrong, and now my joints ache today and I'm never going to get it fixed? And, are you hanging out with those people? And I'm not saying you can't be with them, but decide to be the light in the room instead of the darkness, right? Be on a mission to encourage other people and to maybe even cause a shift in their neural networks by your attitude and your actions. Decide not to live in fear, but rather look for hope in everything, because it's always there if you're willing to look for it. So these are all the kind of things that we need to attach to specific daily habits and alter in order to get the change, like those 70 to 80-year-old men that had to think themselves 20 years younger.
I love that. And don't surround yourself with negative people, right?
Yeah, definitely. So that's a big downer.
Yeah, and it's really important not only having a network of friends and people who can encourage you and you enjoy spending time with, having conversations with, reminiscing about, talking about family, talking about meaningful things. And, it's interesting. You were talking about the news, and the news is predominantly about conflict and about struggles and about bad things. You can selectively choose to read news online and filter out the negative stuff and just read the positive stuff. That's a really important thing to remember. Michelle Steffes with us, founder and CEO of IPV Consulting. They're online at ipvconsulting.com. Also, author. Her 2 books are Reframe and Rewire Greatness Through Daily Routine, and also a children's book, The Machine Inside Me, How to Change Your Brain and Discover the Power Within You. We're talking about having a resilience mindset as you age and becoming a more resilient person. I know there's some myths and some misconceptions, Michelle, about adults thinking, well, I can't change my mind. I'm 71 years old. Or a 52-year-old saying, all right, I've just gone through a divorce. My life is in a mess. I almost declared bankruptcy. How do I start over? I feel lost. I feel bewildered. I don't know where to start. How do you tell those people that you can change?
I think it begins with taking an assessment. I mentioned that a little over a decade ago, I took kind of a different spin on my life. Well, I took a 30,000-foot view, if you will. And that's what I would encourage anybody to do. That's, especially if they've gone through the change, they need to understand the cycle and realize that it's time to make some decisions. So to make those decisions, just like a doctor, you have to have a diagnosis. So sit down and write out who you want to become. What kind of person do you want to be? Who would you like to be connected to? Who are going to be your influences in your life? What would you like to accomplish? I mean, Colonel Sanders didn't even succeed at Kentucky Fried Chicken until he was 65 years old. So you're never too old, okay, to see your dreams come to fruition, whatever they might be. But maybe you just want to be a nice person that's happy and living independently. Whatever it might be, write it down and begin to decide what habits in your life align with that and what habits in your life don't align with that. And just start with that alone and begin to make small changes. I'm not talking about changing everything overnight or in 1 week for that matter. It may even take you 6 months or a year. But over time, make subtle changes that are going to align with who you want to become and start to fill your mind and thoughts intentionally with everything that's going to put you in that frame of mind and in that place, okay? Yeah. So that's, I would say, the biggest advice I could give to anyone that's wanting to say, get out of a terrible situation.
I think that's pretty powerful. And I think also it's important to understand life can really be difficult through losing a loved one unexpectedly. Grief and loss can be crushing through having some kind of a traumatic injury or accident that can take away your ability to walk or see or hear. Any kind of thing that can cause a lifelong disability can be debilitating, but you can adopt a resilience mindset, if you will, Michelle Steffes. I'd like you to talk about that because you never know when you are going to face an adversity yourself or maybe someone in your family, and that can kind of knock everybody off their horse, if you will. What is that resilience mindset?
So the resilience mindset is developed, again, in consistent habits or patterns that you change in your life. Remember, we started it out, and I talked about thoughts and actions that come from patterns and mindsets. So it really begins in redeveloping the patterns and the mindsets and thinking about what you're thinking about, like we talked before. But I really want the audience to understand what that means in terms of physical, tangible efforts that you're going to make. Because the worst thing that I can do is offer you all these practical applications, and then you try it for a couple of days or a week and say, wow, this ain't working. So I want you to understand that you'd have to be in this for the long haul, okay? Most New Year's resolutions are quit. People will quit them within a week or 2 weeks, right? So you have to be in this for the long haul. So what we're talking about here is rewiring the neural networks. You have 100 billion neurons you have since you were born. And you are given the opportunity to wire those in from baby all the way to where you are today, okay? Now, you've got some negative and positive ones. We have about 60,000 thoughts per day, all of us, on average. If I could put a crazy scale in front of you right now and weigh out all your positive thoughts versus your negative ones, and it tips more to the negative than the positive, chances are you wired in more negative neural networks than positive ones. So to change that, you've got to begin to look at your life again, taking that 30,000-foot view, and begin to change the patterns you have right now, okay? So the longer you do it and the more you stay consistent with it, the better chance you have of rewiring your brain and starting to see things better, maybe by the 3rd week or the 4th week or even the 5th week. And if you need to go a little longer, stick with it, because just like a plant that you put in the ground, you don't always get to see the growth until it actually emerges and bears fruit. Your brain is very much like that. So if you are willing to maybe get an accountability partner, have some things in writing, some commitments that you make to yourself, buy maybe the right books or the right programs to begin to work through and stick with it, you will see a shift and a change to more resiliency over time.
You know, this is a powerful thing you do for people, coaching them, helping them rewire their brains. A lot of leaders are naturally, innately gifted to be more resilient people. But some leaders kind of develop over time and through a lot of adversity in their life. They, the school of hard knocks, is as it's very often called. I'd like you to talk just briefly about that in terms of the research we know on leaders and leadership. We're always learning more about this, but what have you experienced in your professional work with leaders and emerging leaders?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that question. I absolutely love working with leaders. And what I find is that when leaders can begin to see people from a different perspective, they lead differently. So what I'm saying is instead of looking them as a number or a producer of an organization, having a human-to-human approach, seeing that, when they're in pain or they're suffering or they're struggling, having enough empathy or compassion to find out the why behind maybe their productivity issues or why maybe they're showing up late, rather than just making assumptions that they're being belligerent. And when you put that human factor in and lead from the heart and start to see them as more of a family rather than just, a bunch of pawns on a chessboard, it's a game changer. Because when people feel valued, they're going to gravitate towards being loyal to the person that makes them feel valued. So this whole subject of resiliency and wiring the brain and helping leaders to not only keep the vision in front of the team, much like we talked about earlier, where you can write your own vision, but keeping the vision and helping the team to see that vision as an end game and align all their decisions and their style of leadership with that vision, that is going to change the focus from just productivity to how can we together as a team begin to push forward and make this happen? And how can I support you and show you how valuable you are to the team? And that is when you begin to see a change in how people act, attitudes change, communication improves, and you start to see more of a cohesive team.
Michelle, you've been studying these areas of neuropsychology and physiology and rewiring the brain for years, thousands of hours. Is the science improving? Are we going to learn more 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road?
I would say yes. And you've got the old Elon Musk neural chip now, where they're actually putting a chip in the brain and utilizing that to restore hearing, to restore someone to have the ability to walk again if they've been paralyzed. I mean, this is all part of the neuroscience or neuroplasticity journey, if you will. So there's definitely going to be some changes and some expansions in what can be done. But I do want to say that, I'm a bit old-fashioned, and I really think that the biggest piece about this is realizing that every day is your choice. And if you look at your life or your leadership or your future as a bank account or maybe a bag of gold coins, and you begin to be more choosy about how you spend every moment, that's when you're going to be able to reap the greatest rewards. And asking yourself questions like, is this something I can control or not? Are my thoughts helping me or hurting me? Am I overthinking or overinflating things? Beginning to analyze what you're thinking about is going to bring the greatest amount of change in neuroplasticity in your life, but it's also going to help you be a teacher to others and help them to be more neuroplastic.
Yeah, that's great wisdom from Michelle Steffes, founder and CEO of IPV Consulting, IPVconsulting.com. Real quickly, before we wrap things up, Michelle, you said you've got some interesting quizzes and exercises people may want to take advantage of on your website, IPVconsulting.com.
Oh, definitely. Yes, you can go to the resources section across the tabs on the website, and there is a resiliency quiz there you can take with the option of inviting more tools into your life. And then there is an emotional intelligence test on that site. I also would encourage listeners to consider visiting my podcast. It's been on the air now for about 5 years. We reach about 125 countries now. There's a lot of topics on resiliency and similar things that we've discussed today. We are in a leadership series right now, but there's a lot of good information out there. And then finally, the Reframe and Rewire book, which is a book workbook to walk you through the process of rewiring through habits. And then this one that's written for children.
That's right. The book is Reframe and Rewire Greatness Through Daily Routine, available wherever you get books, and of course the podcast with the same name, wherever you listen to your podcast. And as you heard, Michelle, a lot of great resources, a lot of great information in that podcast, Reframe and Rewire. Michelle Steffes has been our guest on this episode of This Day and Age as we talk about cultivating resilience as we age. Stick around. I've got those 3 key takeaways about this topic coming up next. As promised, we're going to give you those 3 key takeaways about maintaining a resilience mindset as you age from our guest, Michelle Steffes. Key takeaway number 1, resiliency is an internal process. Despite all of the external circumstances happening in your life, remember that it truly is about you and mind over matter. Key takeaway number 2, understanding the natural cycle of change helps you and empowers you to maintain control during times of difficult transition. And we know life is going to have times of difficult transition. And our key takeaway number 3, no matter what your age, no matter how old you are, your current state of mind, your sense of value and your ability to overcome is grounded in simple, little daily habits, as Michelle said. Those daily habits, routines, and choices. Simple things that add up to a big change over time. It's all about that resilience mindset. And those, my friends, are your 3 key takeaways for this episode on cultivating resilience as you age. And once again, I want to thank our guest, Michelle Steffes, founder and CEO of IPV Consulting, and also author of 2 great books, Reframe and Rewire, Greatness Through Daily Routine, and also a children's book, The Machine Inside Me, How to Change Your Brain and Discover the Power Within You. As a reminder, her podcast is Reframe and Rewire. Want to thank you for listening to this episode of This Day and Age. And hey, do us a favor, share this episode with friends and loved ones, and subscribe if you haven't already so you don't miss any of our future episodes. And by the way, if there's a topic you'd like to hear us cover on an upcoming episode of This Day and Age, I'd love to hear about it. Share that with us at hello@thisdayandage.org. That's hello@thisdayandage.org. And continue to stay tuned for our next episodes. We got a lot to cover down the road. I really can't wait to share it with you. And until next time, for How and Home and This Day and Age, I'm Phil Tower. Thank you so much for listening.